Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us this truth and citations to the sincere Akim and Akwathi Listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to go through, the ancient custom of the land Sabbath and understanding, why it's important, how it essentially, this practice affects us, how Esau does things affects us in a negative sense, realizing that why these customs are so important to make some comparisons, compare and contrast the ways of how Esau does things, right? Versus how the Heavenly Father, set up things, within our laws, within our customs, within our culture, and understanding also, to go even further, why the kingdom of heaven is so, ultimately so important, because, when you look at the way how Esau does things today, in terms of agricultural practices, you realize that a lot of these ways how he does things is not right. You have a lot of these elites, like Gates, that guy. He's buying up a lot of farmland, but they're, even though they do these things in terms of acquiring all this land and substance, their mindset isn't to actually exemplify righteousness with the resources that they have, right? They're just idiots with resources. So as a matter of fact, I didn't have this written down, but let me start off here, because that's another reason why you see like a lot of these people are groaning in regards to the quality in their food, right? Let me just get this here. This is Proverbs chapter 29 verse 2, and it says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And people are in a state of mourning because they realize their food goes through all these different channels and they don't understand. You have to think twice, maybe even 3, 4, 5, 6 times about the kinds of ingredients that's in your food, whether the food's even like real or if it's 3D printed, whether it's mixed in with foods that's abominable, like pork, for example. There's so many things that come across and things that happen, when your food doesn't follow the necessary channels, starting off with the heavenly divine instruction of how it's supposed to actually be kept. The way we treat the land eventually affects our food, and it eventually affects us in our bodies, right? So I wanted to go through some two things I wanted to just read through here, and then I'll get the custom, right, in regards to the land Sabbath, why it's important, some of the benefits of what happens to food when it's actually kept properly, and understanding the ways of Esau, for example. Like, he practices an agricultural custom known as monocropping. Mono meaning one, and crop referring to the yield that you get. So pretty much using a giant space of land to be able just to farm one crop, and what that does to the soil, right? So let me just get this here, and Lord's will, this lesson will be edifying. Okay, so I went to Grok here and I typed in, how does the land Sabbath, or it's also known as land fallowing in agricultural terms, affects the nutrients in the soil? What happens to the land when it's overfarmed, right? So this is, I'm just gonna read like maybe just a couple of points here, just for the sake of time. And so basically this is what it gave me, right? So this is the effects of the following the land Sabbath. It says the buildup of soil of organic matter. So it says weeds, volunteer plants, residue decomposition, add organic material. It says this increases the carbon levels, often significantly shows studies show a rising of 32 to 46% of more in grassland fallow compared to continuously cropped land, which acts as a nutrient sponge. Organic matter holds and slowly releases essential elements like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And these are very key elements here, because when people go to the store that might have their own farm, for example, these are key elements that are actually found in fertilizer to actually make the soil, more fertile, right? This is very important. If your grassland is lacking, like, what's it called, the roots are not as strong, then it's lacking one of these key, specifically like phosphorus. It's lacking specific nutrients. It's lacking specific elements, right? So here it says, let me see. It says overall fertility restoration. It says beneficial microbes multiply in improving nutrient mineralization, breakdown of organics into usable forms. It says studies confirm that in 1 year of fallow, or think of it as in biblical terms, rest, can lead to higher subsequent crop yields. So they gave an example of 30 extra cartons of broccoli per acre in one trial because of these nutrients and biological improvements. It says long-term fallow or resting, land Sabbath resting, generally supports carbon sequestration and does not cause major deterioration in most cases, though results may vary depending on the vegetation, right? So pretty much, you see there's an improvement of important nutrients to keep the soil fertile. That's number one of why the Heavenly Father's ways are ultimately higher than the ways of this world. As a matter of fact, let me read Isaiah, and then I'll come back to this here. This is Isaiah chapter 55, verse 8, and it says here, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord Yahweh. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts," right? So the ways of the Lord are higher than our ways. The ways of the Lord are ultimately as well higher than Esau's ways, because when you look at the landscape of how Esau does things in terms of how he treats the food. Yes, our people, might think that this person is he's an upstanding individual. He has all these different resources, but what he's lacking really and truly is wisdom to be able to properly dish forth righteousness with the resources that he has. Because the scriptures talk about how wisdom is the principal thing, right? So, and that's something that Esau doesn't have. He's a child that basically just has a lot of resources. So they have a lot of land. They have the essentially, as it says in Genesis, they have the fatness of the earth. These particular things, even where a lot of your tribes are situated, today, Esau has control of these different resources, and we will have nothing, right? We basically have crumbs. So, be that as it may, you see that it's not just about having resources. That's why it says in Wisdom of Solomon, if you desire thrones and scepters, honor wisdom first, right? And this is something our people don't seem to still understand for themselves, because you are, that land that those heathens are fighting over today, that's ultimately your land, right? But you have to understand and honor wisdom first to be able to properly, take care of the land, right? It's not just about, Jacob can be very presumptuous, because they want to acquire the substance because they see their enemies prospering, right? But at the same time, you don't actually care for wisdom. And this is really the importance of, showing, why the Lord's ways are important, and coming back to understanding your culture and your heritage and history, because then you get an understanding of actually how the Lord, how you're supposed to be those proper stewards upon the planet. In the book of Deuteronomy, it outlines how, this is your wisdom and your sight in the other nations, and they should look at you and be, essentially the other nations should be in awe in the way how you essentially reflect wisdom, right? So let me get another one, and then I'll go back to Grok and read it. This is Sirach 19. Is it 22? This is Sirach chapter 19, verse 22. And it says, the knowledge of wickedness is not wisdom, neither at any time the counsel of sinners prudence. Right? So, the way how Esau does things, he might be very knowledgeable, but he's not wise. It's not wisdom, because ultimately, he does not fear the Lord. He basically, despises, proper instructions, and he basically casted it behind his back. And what is the fruits thereof? What is the work thereof of a type of person that casts proper divine instruction behind his back? You end up with a society that produces fruits that are seedless, fruits that are, chemically altered. They're sprayed with all kinds of pesticides and so on and so forth, right? Your food is essentially lacking nutrients because, he doesn't follow the ways of the Lord. Your soil is lacking the proper fertility, right? So, just like how a woman has, is supposed to be, fertile, so on and so forth, just like the soil actually also has a fertility as well, and right, and that's one of the things, the soil lacks, when you have somebody, as Esau in rulership. You know what I'm saying? So so now it also gave me the flip side of what happens to soil that is over farmed, right? So over cultivation, basically. So it says, when the land is farmed intensely year after year without rest or rotation, or adequate replenishment, commonly in monoculture systems, the opposite occurs. It says nutrient depletion and soil degradation. It says crops heavily, especially heavy feeders like corn, wheat, vegetables, and continuously remove. It says NPK, which basically just stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and nutrients faster than the process of basic fertilizers can replace them, right? So there are certain foods that require a lot of these different nutrients, right? And if it's done on a land that's over farmed, it's the soil is not as fertile as it should be, right? So here it says direct nutrient exhaustion. It says nitrogen can drop dramatically in long-term continuous systems. It says phosphorus for the same. Potassium follows suit. Organic carbon declines, reducing soil's ability to retain nutrients. In the US alone, roughly 1/3 of fertilizer is applied to corn, simply compensates for ongoing fertility loss rather than boosting new growth, right? So, it says in short here, oh wait, hold on. It says long-term outcomes. It says yields fall sharply, land productivity declines, sometimes to the point of near sterility. So sterility is basically like, if something is sterile, it's unable to like bear fruit, right? It says in extreme cases, restoration requires years of fallow amendments or rotation, right? So it really it just basically, when that happens, you basically just have to let the land rest. That's really just all you have to do. But Esau despises instruction, right? So it says, in short, fallowing or resting, right, acts as a natural recharge for soil nutrients, while overfarming exhausts them like a bank account with withdrawals but no deposits, right? So that's a very good parabolic way they explained it. And it says, leading to poorer soil quality and higher amounts of cost over time, because basically what happens, if it lacks the nutrients, you have to actually buy and spend more on fertilizer, rather than, you wouldn't have to do all those things if you just adhere to the Lord's ways, right? So there's one more thing I wanted to just share real quick. It says, I wanted to find this out as well. How does monocropping affect nutrients in fruits, veggies, and cattle? So it says, monocropping is the agricultural practice of growing a single crop species in the same field year after year profoundly degrades soil health, resulting in lower nutrient density in fruits and vegetables, poor nutrition quality in livestock feed by disrupting nutrient cycles and exhausting specific soil minerals. This practice creates a cycle of dependency on chemical fertilizers while reducing the essential vitamins and minerals available in the food chain. So not only do these practices are harmful, you see that eventually it's a trickle down effect. You don't treat the soil properly, right? So the cattle that use that land, they don't get the adequate nutrients they need. And then when it's time for you, to actually, use that cattle, you don't, as an individual, if you have some land, you don't actually get the adequate nutrients that you need, right? So it's a trickle down effect. That's really all that's going on, right? So going back to the point I made earlier, this is why the Lord's ways are super duper important. This is Isaiah chapter 24, verse 5, and it says, the earth is also defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, and broken the everlasting covenant, right? This is the practice of what you see here, going upon the planet. Now they want to 3D print meat. They mix it in with pork. There's so much, you have to be so mindful of, because, they don't actually follow the ways of the Heavenly Father, right? Okay, so let me just get the law on this, right? Since I've been talking about the land Sabbath for the past few minutes. This is Leviticus chapter 25, verse 1. And it says here, and the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses and in Mount Sinai, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when ye come into the land which I give you, then ye shall keep a Sabbath unto the Lord Yahweh. It says, 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard and gather the fruit thereof, right? So 6 years you have the ability, because when we went into the land, we got our different portions of the land during the time of our forefather Joshua, right? The different tribes got their different portions, right? This is one of the practices we're supposed to do, because we were basically living off the land, right? This whole concept of like supermarkets what we have today, and you have pharmacy, and you have all these different establishments. That wasn't really a thing back in the ancient times. You had portions of your land, you had your cattle, your sheep, your goats, your different herbs, your different trees, figs, pomegranates, seeds, whatever it was, right? You had everything that you needed basically from the land, because you were living off the land, right? But this is the point. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land. It says a Sabbath for the Lord Yahweh Bashmel Shai. It says, Thou shalt neither sow thy field, nor prune thy vineyard, which that which groweth of its own accord. Of thy harvest thou shalt not reap, neither gather the grapes of the vine undressed, for it is a year of rest unto the land. It says, and the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you, and for thee, and for thy servant, and for thy maid, and for thy hired servant, and for thy stranger that sojourneth with thee, and for the cattle, and for the beasts that are in thy land shall all the increase thereof be for meat. Right. So this is very important, because you just leave the land to recuperate the essential nutrients that it needs to actually work for you. And this is one of our people's problems, is they look at the Lord's ways as grievous, right? But this is the laws are the laws are actually very, very good, right? When you actually understand of what is actually, what it does, right? And this is part of the problem here. Our people don't actually appreciate the ways of the Lord, right? So, I wanted to read that. So, just to give an understanding of why these things are so important. And when you see, like, you might go to the store today, and you see foods that don't even have seeds in them, right? Or even the size of the foods. Like, this is something that I've actually noticed when because I bought some avocados the other day, and the avocados I got, one was from Dominican Republic, and the avocados were huge. They were like they were almost, like, I don't know how to describe it. They were almost as big as my hand, right? They were really, really big, as opposed to the ones that I might see here. The ones that you get here in your local grocery stores are not actually that big, right? So I'm just using that as one example. It kind of just helps to paint a picture of why food was a lot bigger back then, why we were a lot bigger back then, why we lived a lot longer back then. That actually is supposed to help add the more understanding to why we essentially had more stature. But now, essentially, as the times progress, and how it says in Maccabees, wickedness multiplied upon the earth. Ever since Esau has been in rulership, it's just been a strong degradation of not just the stature of our people, right, but also the decline in the earth, the decline in the herbs, the decline in the nutrients, the decline in our stature, in a decline in our testosterone. And all these things are affected. You know what I'm saying? So I wanted to read this actually real quick in Numbers, and it says, this is Numbers 13, and because I just made a point in regards to things were just being a lot like bigger, right? This is Numbers 13, verse 1. I want to jump down, and it says in the NLT, the Lord Yahweh now said to Moses, send out men to explore the land of Canaan, the land that I am giving to the Israelites. It says, send one leader from each of the 12 ancestral tribes. So Moses did as the Lord commanded him, and he sent out 12 men, all tribal leaders from their camp in the wilderness of Paran. So I want to jump down to something that was mentioned during this spying out the land, right? So this is verse 23, and it says, and when they came to the valley of Eshcol, they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes so large that it took 2 of them to carry it on a pole between them. And they also brought back samples of the pomegranates and the figs, right? So, let me read verse 24, and it says, and that place was now called the Valley of Eshcol, which means cluster, because the cluster of grapes that Israelite men cut there, right? So just imagine, like, you think about the quality and the size of a lot of our fruits and veggies that we have now, and think about this cluster of grapes where it took 2 men to carry it. on a pole between them. It shows you how like big, food, the resources back then were. It shows you just, even our stature, when you read about a lot of our, and how long we live. Like, we don't live as long as like a lot of our ancestors. We don't live as long as them. Like, think about how long Adam lived and their descendants. We don't live that long anymore. And there was a period in time, they didn't even have to till the soil, right? But we understand that, Esau had to, come up rules so we can understand and actually appreciate righteousness, appreciate the Lord's way even more, right? So, this is, let me get this here. I guess I'll end it off here actually, but that was pretty much the point. Let me go to Wisdom of Solomon. This is Wisdom of Solomon 6 verse 24, and it says, but the multitude of the wise is in the welfare of the world, and a wise king is upholding of the people, right? So let me get that word welfare, because part of the kingdom of heaven is it's not just like having multiple women. That's a part of it, you know but understanding, like, the earth is actually going to be properly taken care of. What they do, I don't know when it is. I don't know if it's this month or last month, when they talk about Earth Day, right? There's no such thing as Earth Day in the kingdom, because the earth is actually going to be proper, under proper righteous rulership. You know what I'm saying? So this is welfare, state of condition of doing well, right? And the earth is not doing well, right? Things have, as it says in Ezra, things have become weaker, through age. It says safe or secure condition, exemption from evil. It says in good fortune, prosper, to do well, farewell. It says the social concern for the well-being of children, the unemployed. And Esau despises the poor, right? He doesn't actually regard, and that's another thing that that was mentioned actually in Leviticus, because when you let the land rest, anything that was just not harvested per se, but was this there, and it just stood on the tree, for example, then it was also an opportunity as well to for people who were less fortunate to actually use what was just on the land, basically, right? So for Israelites that were sojourning on the land, then you had the poor of our people that might have lost, like widows, for example, or even children that lost their parents. It was an opportunity for them to actually utilize what was on the land already, right? So Esau is a type of person that doesn't care about the poor. That's why all these things are happening, because, like, for example, that situation in Amazon, for example, they did, with that worker that died. Esau doesn't actually care about the welfare of his own people, right? So, anyways, I rambled on quite long enough, but Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.